There is a food so old that pharaohs placed it in tombs to feed the dead. Small, brown, knobbly tubers tucked into clay jars beside gold and linen, offered for the journey to the afterlife. Yet today, that same plant is often named a nuisance, a weed in agricultural bulletins, and in many fields it is fought with herbicide after herbicide. How did something revered by ancient civilizations come to be treated like a menace? The superfood you didn't know was a weed is a long, strange story of resilience, biology, and economics. If this sounds new to you, subscribe to catch the next vault of lost foods. Archaeology gives us the first shock. Chufa, also called tiger nuts, Cyperus esculentus, turns up in places and times that trace a deep human relationship with tubers. Archaeobotanical remains identified as chufa appear in Paleolithic sites and in pre-dynastic Egyptian contexts. They were placed in tombs and ground into cakes. These finds don't prove a single uninterrupted culinary tradition, but they do show repeated independent choices by human communities to harvest and value this plant. In other words, people have trusted chufa for millennia across cultures and climates. That trust is not trivial. It is an accumulation of experience, edible, storable, useful. And the plant itself helps explain why humans kept it around. Cyperus esculentus is not a potato. It's a sedge, a grass-like relative that makes many small, round tubers on fine roots. Those tubers are the edible part, dense, sweet, and nutty when fresh. Chewy and crisp when dried. They rehydrate easily, they store, they sprout new plants. A single patch can, in a season, produce dozens of underground buds. That reproductive strategy is the key to both the plant's survival and its trouble with modern agriculture. Imagine the tuber between your fingers. It is about the size of a large pea or small marble, wrinkled brown, scented faintly of almonds and earth. Bite into a rehydrated one, and you might encounter an almost nutty sweetness, a crunch turning slowly to a chewy interior. Grind them into flour, and they become a gluten-free, slightly sweet powder. Pound them and mix with water, and in Valencia they become horchata de chufa, a milky, fragrant drink poured cold on summer afternoons. In West African markets, they appear as snacks, flowers, and ingredients for local dishes. In recent years, health food shelves have begun to label them tiger nuts, bagged and sold as an ancient super snack. Botanically, chufa is deceptively simple and stubborn. As a sedge, it prefers moist soils and can tolerate poor soil fertility. Instead of depending mostly on seed reproduction, it invests in vegetative tubers, underground storage organs that remain viable for multiple seasons. Those tubers can withstand drying and rehydrate later. They can be stored almost indefinitely under the right conditions and then planted again. For smallholders, this is a revolution in seed security. You do not need to buy new seed every year. You save tubers and plant them next season. That trait, self-sufficiency, made chufa valuable to communities with limited market access. It also makes the plant a nightmare in fields managed by large-scale monoculture, where predictable cycles and uniform crops matter. Nutritionally, chufa is notable in ways that explain its cultural survival. It contains a mix of macronutrients and complex carbohydrates, a significant amount of healthy fats dominated by oleic acid, the same monounsaturated fat prominent in olive oil, and a fiber-rich profile with resistant starches. Resistant starch resists digestion in the small intestine and reaches the colon, where research suggests it can act like prebiotic fiber, feeding microbial populations and producing short-chain fatty acids that are associated with gut health. Chufa also supplies minerals and a complement of amino acids that make its proteins more valuable than those of many tubers. These are not miracle claims, they are descriptions of composition. They explain why people have ground chufa into flours, pressed it into oil, or mixed it into drinks. It stores well, it tastes good, and it carries a useful concentration of calories and nutrients in a small, durable package. If chufa's biology and nutrition make it sound like a low-input dream crop, that's precisely the tension at the heart of its modern story. Beginning in the 20th century, agricultural institutions in North America and Europe began classifying certain cypress species as yellow nutsedge, a pest of row crops, turf, and planted beds. Manuals and extension bulletins described it as a problem because it grows where crops are desired and because its tubers are hard to eliminate. The practical control advice followed: cultural methods, mechanical removal, and chemical controls. Over time, research funds targeted management strategies for nutsedge in corn, soy, and cotton systems. Extension services circulated protocols to identify and eradicate it. In many agricultural contexts, chufa ceased to be treated as a potential crop and became, for policy and practice, the same species as a weed. This classification matters because it shaped where and how the plant could persist. When a species is listed in agronomic literature as a menace, it becomes the subject of control campaigns. Herbicides are developed and marketed for its suppression. Extension agents advise farmers on eradication methods. Regulatory frameworks permit chemical control in certain settings. Agricultural research projects often prioritize eradication because agricultural productivity metrics treat any non-crop biomass as competition. So a plant that offers low input calories, easy seed saving, and alternative value chains presents difficult questions for an industrial model built on patented seeds, credit-based inputs, and mechanized production. It is important to be precise here. The word banned in our title is a rhetorical shorthand for a different reality. Chufa has been, in many places, systematically suppressed as a crop by being grouped with weeds, targeted by herbicide campaigns, and omitted from mainstream crop development programs. Where legal bans exist, they are the exception and should be cited case by case. More commonly, institutional practices and market structures have marginalized chufa, pushing it off commercial fields and into the margins of gardens, small holdings, and cultural production. Why would institutions and markets favor suppression over cultivation? The answers are structural. First, chufa reproduces vegetatively by tubers. That means farmers can save their planting material year to year, reducing dependency on purchased seed or proprietary varieties. It also complicates mechanized, standardized production systems that prefer uniform seedlots and predictable planting schedules. Second, chufa thrives with minimal inputs, limited fertilizer, little mechanized sowing, and often no irrigation beyond natural moisture in some varieties. That undermines a model of agriculture built on selling fertilizers, patented seeds, and herbicides. Third, chufa's value is mostly local and traditional. Horchata in Valencia, local snacks in West Africa, rather than generating large, centralized commodity markets with long supply chains. Third-party capital finds it harder to package and patent that knowledge. In short, a resilient public domain food that can be reproduced in kitchen cupboards does not fit neatly into a business model that profits from ongoing dependence. This clash has consequences. Extension bulletins historically described yellow nutsedge as a persistent invader, recommending multi-year management plans. Some agronomic research focused overwhelmingly on chemical controls, how to kill tubers or prevent sprouting, rather than on how to cultivate the plant as a crop. Catalogues of crop research projects rarely list chufa among their priorities. That tilt is not necessarily conspiratorial. It is the product of funding priorities, perceived market value, and agronomic framing. But the result is that a plant with deep human roots became, in many regions, invisible to formal agricultural development. And yet chufa persisted, Cultural traditions carried it forward. In Valencia, horchata de chufa remains a summertime emblem. Small farms still harvest chufa by hand, local cooperatives sustain varieties, and street-side stands pour the cooled, milky beverage to customers who have trusted the flavor for generations. In West Africa, where in some accounts it was cultivated and traded by the Hausa people, tiger nuts are folded into market economies in ways that global commodity chains often miss. Today, they appear in supermarket health aisles as tiger nut flour, pressed oil, and snack bars marketed to paleo and gluten-free consumers. Researchers have even examined the oil for potential biodiesel use, and scientists interested in resilient cropping systems are re-examining chufa's roles in diversification, soil health, and smallholder livelihoods. These modern resurgences are uneven. In Spain, the cultural product remained visible because of long-standing gastronomic value. In parts of Africa and the Mediterranean, local demand and traditional seed saving kept production alive. In North America and other regions where chufa is labeled simply as yellow nutsedge, the plant survives mostly as a weed, fiercely hard to eradicate, sometimes inadvertently cultivated in garden patches where people appreciated its tubers. The global story is therefore one of pockets of survival, heritage networks, and emerging markets pushing back against a century of marginalization. What does this mean for food security and food sovereignty? There are lessons, but no simple panaceas. Chufa's strengths: longevity of stored tubers, low input needs, nutrient density, and the ability to reproduce via small seed-like tubers, make it potentially valuable in contexts where resilience matters. Saved planting material reduces dependence on cash purchases. Durable stores of dried tubers can be a buffer against seasonal shortages, and the nutritional profile can diversify diets in ways that are meaningful locally. But scaling such benefits requires attention to agronomy, to market development that doesn't erase local value chains, and to social structures that support smallholders rather than try to subsume them into a single model of productivity. If chufa offers practical promise, its larger significance is symbolic. It reveals a key dynamic: the foods that fit an industrial paradigm, commodified, patentable, input-dependent, receive research, market push, and policy support. The foods that enable autonomy, that can be saved in jars and planted by hand, often remain in the shadowy category of weeds or traditional crops. The classification matters because it channels resources. It can mean the difference between a plant becoming a global commodity and a plant being a local secret, preserved by families and markets that taste and remember. So what can a viewer do with this knowledge? A few small, practical steps matter more than grand pronouncements. Try tiger nuts or horchata where you can. Taste is often the doorway to curiosity. Seek out heritage producers, cooperatives in Valencia, or market vendors in African towns, and support those value chains. If you garden, experiment with small plantings, and learn from the plant's biology, you will see why it appears where you would least expect it. And read extension materials and historical studies with a critical eye. Ask what research priorities highlight and what they omit. There are also policy conversations worth having about agricultural research priorities, seed sovereignty, and the preservation of underutilized crops. Supporting public research into low-input, nutritionally dense plants does not require upending markets overnight. It does require funding choices that broaden the menu of what is considered worthy of study. Food security benefits when we steward diversity rather than reduce it to a handful of high-volume commodities. History does not end at the edge of a field. The tuber that once shared tomb space with pharaonic treasures still holds stories of taste, of survival, of quiet resistance to control. It can be a snack, a drink, an ingredient, or a case study in how agricultural systems decide what is valuable. Remembering that story is a small act of preservation. If this opened something for you, subscribe, share, and check the description for sources and where to try tiger nuts.